Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all are enjoying your Friday. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as we get started in just a few seconds.
As people are adding their names to the chat, if you are feeling a little bit creative, maybe add a word about how you're feeling today. It's very Friday. I'm feeling a little, I think fried would be my word personally. Christina, can you make Pascal co-host, please? Yeah, spent. I hear that one. Ian's word is ready, which is really outperforming a lot of us who are feeling tired right now.
Oh, it's ready for the weekend.
Okay, got it. That's helpful. Thank you. Abigail, hopeful about change. That's good. Renee, it's a little late to be caffeinated. I don't know. For me, anyway. Okay, so I think we'll get started here. We've got a few people lined up today, and then at the end of some updates, we're going to go through some of the questions that we didn't get to last time, and we'll walk through those, and we'll keep up that process of doing that because I'm sure there will just be more and more. But just to start, Christina, if you want to go to the next slide. Thanks for adding words in the chat. This is making me feel more connected to the row of faces. So today, as of July 17th, there are 13,810 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Boston residents. 9,856 of those have fully recovered and 720 have died. Some of the news, the updates that we have this week are about testing. So Boston has been expanding testing to the point that it's widely available across the city at more than 20 locations and mobile sites. Testing is covered by insurance if someone has symptoms or a confirmed exposure, but many sites are also offering testing at no cost, even if those criteria aren't met. You can find a map of testing sites and information about those sites at boston.gov/coronavirus. There are mobile testing sites open to anyone, regardless of symptoms. And if you're looking at the site or you're confused about what's available or whether or not you can just walk up, you should call the mayor's health line at 617-534-5050. In the press conference this week, the mayor spoke about how the city has seen higher than average positive rates in the Latinx community. Latinos make up 20% of Boston's population, but represent 28% of the city's overall COVID-19 cases. And this is part of the story that we've been watching unfold around how racial inequities are playing out in these public health numbers. And that inequity has grown specifically with the Latino population over the course of the pandemic. So this week, the city is investing over $400,000 in a community plan to address the inequities shown by those numbers. The Boston Resiliency Fund is providing grant support to the Greater Boston Latino Network, as well as the East Boston Neighborhood Health Center and Whittier Street Health Center in Roxbury. I think Emily is going to cover some of this as well. I just wanted to say something quickly that I think actually isn't on the slides here, but about the census. So by now, everyone on this call, I'm sure, has taken the census themselves. Long pause while I stare at you. Emily's also going to stare at you. Please find creative ways to engage your communities to also take the census. And I want to say thank you to those of you who have already done that. But a lot of people don't take the census because they don't understand what it is or what it impacts, whether or not they're going to be safe sending in personal information to the government. So I'm going to share a couple of fact sheets in the chat later in the hour that can give you some just like good facts and material to back up any kind of communications that you're doing around that and getting people to take the census. The city's current response rate is under 53%. And that's lower than both the national and statewide rates, which are 62% and 64% respectively. So we really need to get that up. Lastly, please do not wait on submitting an application for the Arts and Culture COVID Fund. This application does require a vendor ID with the city, and there are instructions on the website about how to get a vendor ID for the grant. So that's all on the same grant page. It can take a few days because you have to submit a form and then get an email back from the city's supplier portal with that vendor ID. So do that now so that you're not stuck in any kind of technical issue and we can help you troubleshoot anything that comes up. If you have ever received funding from us, you probably already have a vendor ID that works. If you're not sure, like, please do a quick search of your email for vendor ID or City of Boston supplier portal. And if you still don't see anything or you think it's the wrong information, email arts@boston.gov and we will help you out and be able to look that up and see if you have one already. The most common problem with those is just making sure that the address is correct on it so that we're cutting checks to the right places. So just email us if you have any questions about it. And I don't want any to be stuck at the last minute with problems with their vendor ID and then not be able to get their application in. And with that, we can go to the next slide, and I think I'm turning it over to Marian.
Thank you so much, Cara and Pascal, for inviting me to share a little bit about a project that's recently been launched today and just wanting to share some updates. I was taking a look at the name of participants that are here with us today, and a lot of you are already part of this, so thank you, and I look forward to hearing more about how week one has been. So a couple of weeks ago, we brought together this idea of creating a cultural equity learning community. And the CELC is focused on building racial and creative justice within the arts and culture sector. And it's open to all arts and culture sector leaders that are committed to building racial equity and creative justice. And it includes a go at your own pace 2-unit course where we have 8 weeks for each unit. We can advance the slide, please. Thank you, and bless you, Pascal. We have quite a few partners and team members that have made this work possible and that are propelling it. So I just want to give a moment of recognition to the core team members, Elisa Lyles-Ampanza, Deidre Montgomery, Mina Malik, and Joseph Kiesel. Along with myself, it's a beautiful team of humans that I'm really grateful to work with, and we've been able to work with a phenomenal team of community partners that have made this work possible, and particularly the funding partners that have been able to make this work available to our entire sector, regardless of cost, which I think is really beautiful and really necessary given the time that we are in financially and economically, and also just the necessity to do this work always. So thank you for that. Next slide, please. A quick overview of the materials and how they're structured. So if you haven't already signed up, you can get an idea of what you might be joining us for. There are weekly pre-recorded lectures and homework, and that's delivered to your inbox every Monday. And then there's also a peer-to-peer mentorship match, which actually the first round of matches will go out this evening, which is really exciting. And that's set up to create a sustained learning cohort model so that folks can continue to work with one another outside of just Unit 1 and Unit 2. There are drop-in office hours available with the core team members, and then there's also expert panels that are led by local and national Black, Indigenous, and or person of color and or queer, trans, person of color arts leaders in our community. And just to give an idea of some of the topics that we're covering, here's the first couple of weeks that we've been going through. This week was really focused on processing grief and injustice. So asking ourselves where we are in this moment and where we want to be. This upcoming week, we're focusing on walking into privilege and confronting white privilege in particular. Week 3 and week 4 really focused on language and how we utilize it in the sector and in our everyday lives. So week 3 looks at diversity, equity, inclusion, ability, implicit bias, microaggressions, anti-racism, and anti-Blackness. And week 4 looks at the terms ally, accomplice, co-conspirator, intersectionality, cultural equity, and creative justice. And those weeks 3 and 4 really lay a foundation for us to then get into our action plans and work together. Next slide, please. And a quick overview of where we are. At this moment, we have over 900 registrants and 750 people have enrolled. So that means they're officially formally taking the course, which we're just like overwhelmed and excited by. So thank you to our community for mobilizing. 70% of our enrolled folks are from Massachusetts, 30% are national scope, representing 15 states, which is really cool. Generally, we're at about 74% female, 22% male, 4% non-binary, 86% of participants are white, 14% identify as BIPOC, 23% identify as LGBTQIA, and 4% as part of the disability community and or as disabled. And just to get a sense of where folks are within the sector as well, 58% are in nonprofit spaces and a lot of arts admin as well as a lot of artists. 16% are in higher ed, 9% government, 6% for-profit, 4% K-12, and 4% are independent contractors. So hopefully you see yourself reflected somewhere in this data, and it can be a continual invitation to come and join us. Again, it's not too late to sign up. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I'll drop the link here, and this will be in the slides that go out to everybody after our meeting today too, but you can just visit culturalequitylc.org. Late registration will be open until the end of next week. And again, just taking a moment to thank everybody who is part of this community and who is doing this work alongside all of us. It's really profoundly moving and exciting to get to do this work with all of you. So thank you very much, and major thanks to the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture in the City of Boston for all of the support in making this happen.
Thanks so much, Marion. All right, let's move to the next slide. I think it's time for Emily to give us an update.
Hey all, Marion, kudos and congratulations to you and your team. I'm so excited and so blown away. So I just want to give some quick updates and talk a little bit about some things that are happening on the federal level. So I just want to, there's two things that are like happening right now that I just want to make sure that we're clear on terminology and what's going on. So federal pandemic assistance, which was providing unemployment assistance to gig workers or workers who don't get their unemployment through a full-time employment in an employer, that was set up as part of the CARES Act, and that's the first time in, I believe, American history that that's actually happened. That's huge. But there's a myth going on that that is going to end soon. It is not. So it is viable through December 31st. And I want to just sort of clarify. That doesn't mean that it should end on December 31st. In fact, I would argue that our sector is should prioritize making sure that this never ends. And so I've included a link to an action and some information about how you can engage on that issue and talk with lawmakers about that. The other piece, which is the federal unemployment pandemic compensation, was an additional amount. It was like up to $600 a week for people who were receiving unemployment. That is set to end next week on July 25th, and that needs immediate action. However, this is not a popular provision on for Republicans who control the House. And so we need to be really pushing on this and advocating. I'm pretty positive we have 2 senators who are absolutely, yeah, Richard, I am going to, that our senators are supportive of this, but this issue is huge, and we need to make sure that our colleagues and networks in states where their senators may not be supportive understand it's going to come out that McConnell is going to release this before the August recess. So here are the rumors that I am hearing. Rumor 1, which is in bold. And obviously congressional delegations. So that's a real hope. It has not been confirmed, but it is a huge hope. Then there's extension of PPP. There's talk about doing another round of paycheck protection program loans. Maybe that if organizations got one in the first round, you might be eligible for a second round. And so I've just included a hyperlink to an action you can take where you can write to our state senators and make sure that the provisions that are in the HEROES Act, which was again released by Pelosi and the House, passed by the House, but McConnell and the president said there's no way we're going to pass that and sign that into law. But there are provisions in there that we want to make sure are included in the fourth stimulus. So be sure to make sure that you take that action as well. Next slide. Awesome. Okay, so then state advocacy. So a lot's happened. We're starting to see the State House start to move on things, except for the state budget. That still seems to be on a 1/12, which again, that's the month-to-month budget. So instead of passing a whole fiscal year 21, they're just doing month-to-month. There's some talk that maybe they'll do a 6-month, again, because there's such lack of clarity about revenue right now. They are very concerned about putting out a full yearly budget. So that's still in a holding pattern. The Economic Development Bond Bill was released at a committee. It does not include anything for the arts, but this is only the beginning of the process. It will now go to Ways and Means, where it will get another revision, and it'll be debated. And we are working to talk to our arts champions in the State House and talk about how we can make sure the creative community is included in that conversation. And then this week, the legislature sent a COVID-19 supplemental budget spending bill to Baker for signature. This includes a small amount for small cultural nonprofits, so $2 million. This was actually introduced and co-sponsored by Senator O'Connor and then Senator Hines on the Senate side, and then it was included and adopted by the House. So again, we are working really hard at every sort of step of the way to try and make sure that the creative community is included. By no means do I think $2 million for small, not cultural nonprofits is satisfactory and is the end of the game, and nobody does, but this is part of the larger path towards working to get relief for the sector. Two other things that I just want to mention, excuse me. In August, the COVID-19 moratorium on evictions and foreclosures is set to expire. This was, again, a bill that was passed in April. So there's a lot of work in the housing advocacy world to make sure that that does not in fact expire, because the reality is that we are not out of COVID, we're not out of the woods, and there are a lot of people who are housing insecure at the moment. So sorry, Dan Marshall privately, and thank you, I'm not trying to put you on blast, Dan, asks me about I used the incorrect lesser than symbol. So it is for small. So it's for the relief fund is for cultural nonprofits that have fewer than 25 staff members. This might be why I had a couple tricky questions in math class. So there are housing advocates, including the MACDC, City Life, that I would encourage you, CHAPA, which is another one I would encourage you to reach out to and see how you can engage on that. And then the other piece is that over the weekend, last weekend, the Senate passed their version of a police reform bill. The House has chosen that they are going to accept written testimony. This is something the Senate didn't do, from anyone who would like to submit written testimony. So in this slide deck, you will get a hyperlink to how you can submit your written testimony. Again, this is another space where I would say that there are police reform advocates and groups that have been doing this work for a lot longer, and we're just trying to lift up and amplify that work here. So those are two things to engage on in that are important in terms of our community's safety, well-being, and health. Next slide, please. Huh, that's interesting. I think I'm missing a slide, Christina. Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks. So the other thing that happened, and I'm sorry, I'm going to try to wrap this up really quickly. And then there's one other slide that I think is missing. I'm sorry, Christina. So earlier this week, the Senate had a listening session for arts, culture, and small businesses to talk about the impact of COVID-19. At that hearing, Mass Cultural Council released their impact data survey from over 300 arts and cultural nonprofits that basically told a very sobering story about what our COVID has done to our sector. It is such useful data because this is the piece, this is like the linchpin of our case making, of saying like, this is how much, this is the price tag. This is how much we've lost. It's close to $425 million. And this is how much it's going to take just in sort of like reopening and recovery for the creative nonprofits. And again, we are a larger sector, but this did focus on the nonprofits. There was a good amount of press coverage from this testimony, from this hearing. And there are links so you can take a look at that. This is the action that I would really encourage you, highly, highly encourage you to take. So we set up an action alert so you can reach out to your state legislators and urge them to include relief for the arts and cultural sector as they are working on COVID-19 relief and economic stimulus. We've listed 4 things. One is if there's any more federal funds that come for state aid, make sure the creative community is included. Make sure that there is 100% forgiveness for nonprofits who self-insured for unemployment. This is a big thing for nonprofits who are still need to pay for the unemployment of their staff but don't have the cash reserves to do it. The third one is making sure that there is support for individual creative workers through workforce development and support programs. And then the fourth one is passing the Massachusetts Public Art Program, which would provide money to put artists back to work doing public art projects. So again, this is like the third action item to share with you all and with our state legislators. We are going to be continuing to put these out. This is like where we're going to go into hyperdrive here, and it's going to be really important that we are sharing this with all of our staffers, with all of our board members, and all of our key folks, right, and stakeholders. So please take a look at that. I would also, you see in this, if you have relationships with legislators or staffers that go beyond the email conversation, this is the time, this is the moment to call them and to check in. The things to talk about are what's going on with your organization, what has COVID-19 and the prolonged closure of our field meant. And then the other thing is, look, you've got a lot on your plate. We know you're making tough decisions, but you have to prioritize our sector if you want a full economic and communal recovery of Massachusetts. So I think there should have been a slide, and I apologize. There should be a slide about a live events coalition march that is happening on Monday. Yes, there it is. Fantastic. Yay. Thank you. So the Live Events Coalition is a coalition of hospitality planners, caterers, talent, musicians, producers, technicians, general contractors. Thank you. It's Tuesday. Sorry about that, Richard. Engineers and suppliers and manufacturers and more. There is going to be a walk to work. If you click on this icon, that's the walk to work icon, it will link you to the Extend PUA. No, it'll link you to the Eventbrite for this rally. And I would encourage you to check it out and to be a part of it. This is a space where it is both the nonprofit and for-profit creative sector can stand up together and rally for the extension of PUA past December 31st and making sure that the that additional up to $600 does not expire next week. That's super, super important. And in the chat box, there's some really great notes to or items to look at in terms of NIVA, which is the National Independent Venue Association. I would highly encourage you to check it out. Cara has put the link in the chat box. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Emily. Always with the most important info. All right, we're gonna move it over to Parks. Lou and Paul, I believe you two are here. If you could just go over some new guidelines that have come out in terms of phase 3, step 1 for Parks. I think you're both muted.
Awesome. Can you hear me? So as you can see on the slide, these are the new state guidelines, which we just got. 50 people or less without live music or anything that'll attract a larger crowd can be permitted with the proper social distancing. Between 50 and 100 people can go before the special events committee and inspectional services help. And if they show a proper safety plan, they could also be permitted. And anything over 100 at this point is not until at least after Labor Day. Paul, anything? Did you get Paul here?
Yeah, I'm still here. So Eva, there's no amplification in this phase. Some of the things that I included were ideas that have been going around the country and around the world. I think that, just because we're in this phase does not mean that the creative community needs to be sidelined. I'm doing something with Lily Many Colors on the Boston Common right now. We did a video with the Boston Celtics for content for Orlando. Each of the NBA teams are doing stuff. The film community, the film bureau that's headed up by Amy and Kate, we will entertain small projects too, like small filmings, those type of things. But there's some ideas here. We're doing drive-in movies. There have been a number of people who've been doing drive-in concerts, that you can then minimize the amount of people if they have cars. This is not eliminating busking by any stretch of the imagination. Improv, mime, if some people want to practice wet paint, wet paint events. I remember the Copley Society used to do that. I don't know if they have, but wet paint is still going on where, artists fan out across the city and, do their craft in front of people with social distancing. I think that, there's some really good ideas that are here, and we don't necessarily, imitation is the best form of flattery. And we want to work with people. We have over 360 parks and playgrounds that, if you just want to go and take a guitar and sit and play. I don't know how many people follow Jack Darrow on Instagram. Jack has been following a guitarist that has been doing impromptu concerts on the Common. And so, art continues in this dark time, and, we want to try to be there for you.
Michelle, I just saw your chat. We are allowing weddings and photography in the public garden. Otherwise, we traditionally don't even permit events in there. We have done some, Paul did a tree projection, tree art installation. But otherwise, it's just basically weddings and photography in there.
There was another question about live music being permissible in terms of amplification.
No amplification.
Yeah, so the reason we're not doing that is because Consumer Affairs and Licensing aren't issuing entertainment licenses, which any amplification, whether it's music, speaking, or whatever, actually needs. And the reason why is everything is basically an open space. So you can have on your permit that you have 50 people and have a live band, and then 500 people hear the music, and there's kind of no way for us to control that. So until Consumer Affairs starts issuing entertainment licenses, we're just not doing any amplification right now.
Someone asked, do these permits only pertain to public park spaces? What about events on private property, like a commercially owned lot?
I guess the guidelines are the same as far, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. I think the guidelines are the same no matter where. So if the city of Boston, they actually do issue entertainment licenses for private lots that are in the city for outdoor stuff. So I would assume it's probably the same, that they wouldn't issue a license.
Yeah, that's right. It's the same rules for outdoor events regardless, but these guys, Lou and Paul, are the ones who would be helping you out with events specifically, or outdoor events specifically in parks.
There was a question about dance classes not being able to use music, and is the recommendation to use acoustical accompaniment instead of having any amplification?
Yeah, unfortunately, my daughter's a choreographer. She would probably shoot me for that, but that's basically that is the case. No amplification. I mean, if we're talking about a boom box, we're not talking about a full DJ or an iHome. That's fine. But again, anything that would attract a lot of people would be a problem.
Tina, could you move to the next slide? There was something else for parks too.
So some of these things are just, you know, things that I've seen across the country or seen and talked to people here. I mean, a lot of people saw the what the Italians were doing and the French singing from the balconies. I think that those type of things can happen. I think if someone, you know, people are using pickup trucks to do concerts, you know, where they're actually kind of moving or staying. I think that at some point, you know, things will move on. We don't really know when this phase will change. As the governor is very, you know, says often, is that it's driven by the data, not the dates. So it's a bit frustrating for us to plan things like this to understand and explain it to people. And we're trying to do the best we can and try to help people through it.
Are permits needed for small outdoor movement classes that are by pre-registration only?
We are doing, the unfortunate part of it is like before it probably wouldn't have been. Now we are, because I have so many people who are out doing it. So if someone's interested in that, they can contact me directly at paul.mccaffrey@boston.gov, and I'll help them out with that. But we have about 20 different movement type organizations that are out doing various forms of exercise, yoga, etc.
Paul, could you leave your email in the chat just in case people weren't able to catch it?
Sure.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Anything else for Paul and Lou? We will have time at the end, probably in the next 10, 15 minutes, to go over any questions, and we actually have more questions on the next slide. So let's move to the next slide, please. Great. So like Cara said in the beginning, we're going to be going over some of the questions we weren't able to go over from last week's meeting. So the first one is there guidance on how workers should hand out materials while maintaining social distancing? I'm imagining a lot of stepping up to and back from tables, but if there's other guidance, that would be useful.
Yeah, so our answer on this one is that the best practice is to implement electronic versions of commonly touched physical materials like menus or playbills to the greatest extent possible. In the event that physical materials must be passed out, workers should follow best public health protocol, including wearing face masks or coverings and gloves, maintaining 6 feet of physical distance, and sanitizing materials between use. So there isn't really some very specific guidance about how to like maneuver around a table with materials, but best practice digital, and then following all of the normal physical distancing guidelines if you do have to actually handle materials.
We consider lobbies where people are waiting to enter while socially distancing as a separate space in terms of capacity guidelines.
Yeah, so we had a lot of questions, and I think there's a few more in here about whether or not a space is subject to the 8 persons per 1,000 square feet. Any enclosed space within a facility will be capped at a maximum capacity of 8 persons per 1,000 square feet, or no more than 25 people. Best practice is to install physical markers where people are waiting to enter to delineate every 6 feet. And if you're not sure like what constitutes a space or not, that has like a specific number of people allowed, think about the actual flow of people and where people are congregating, and look at what your actual occupancy says, because some spaces will have occupancy certificates with certain numbers for smaller spaces within a larger space, and anything that doesn't have that follows that every other space rule, where if you don't have that number like legally down on a piece of paper, it's 8 persons per 1,000 square feet.
Are there standards in place that third-party production companies that provide sound, video, and/or lighting will be held to?
So there's no specific guidance for these industries, but they will have to follow the guidelines for the spaces in which they operate. So if you're in a theater, you have to follow the theater guidelines. If you're in a museum, you have to follow the museum guidelines.
Is there a uniform policy in response to deal with guests who are non-compliant with safety protocols, especially mask and social distancing?
So this is one where we're still trying to work with our health commission partners to figure out what they would recommend. There isn't necessarily a uniform policy, like something that we're asking everyone to do, but there might be a best practice that we can share. So we're still investigating this one.
If there is an existing annual entertainment license, can we act under that license or for amplified music outdoors? This just came in the chat.
Oh, like I don't see that on the screen. Thanks, Pascal. Is there an existing annual entertainment license we can act under? I am not sure. I think the answer is no, but let me look into that one, Maggie.
Awesome. Are there the same requirements for patrons as we are making for staff? Are we required to take temperatures, contact tracing information for all who enter the venue, staff, and patrons?
So there is a requirement to maintain a log of both workers and visitors to support potential contact tracing, including name, date, time, and contact information. Workers must be screened for symptoms at the beginning of each shift, and best practice is also to take worker temperatures. There isn't a requirement on providing temperature screenings for visitors, but best practice is to perform a symptom screening, asking visitors if they are experiencing any symptoms when they're making a reservation, when they check in physically, and or both.
All right, this one just came in from the chat. Does that mean that if we have a 1,500 square feet open space arts venue with a gathering capacity of 78 people, are we simply limited to 25% of it, which is 19.5 people, or are we limited to 8 people per 1,000 square feet, which results in a capacity of 12?
I believe that you're limited to the percentage and not to the 8 people per 1,000 square feet, because you're talking about a space that has a capacity of 78. Pascal, does that sound right to you? I think that's correct. For all of these where I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's correct. It's because I'm, like all of you, reading these things in real time and doing the kind of circle of pinging from different guidelines. But like we did with this week, I'll go through and I'll confirm all of these. I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think so too, but confirmation will come. If I am rehearsing a string orchestra in a large classroom in a community center or senior center or gymnasium, is whatever room we are using considered a performance venue for our rehearsals? So would we be limited to 8 people per 1,000 square feet?
Yeah, so the short answer here is yes. And we had to get some clarifying language from the state around rehearsals, because there's a lot of, the way that the state is talking about guidelines is really around the venues as opposed to the activity that happens in the venues. So we're trying to get more clarity on this and more ability for you to be able to do different kinds of activities that aren't events with audiences, and make sure that's clearly approved at this point. So we did reach out and we got this back, which was acting groups may rehearse and record performances indoors during step 1 of phase 3. In step 1, audiences are not permitted and the performers must follow the applicable protocols in the theater and performance venue protocols. So what this is kind of saying is that you can have rehearsals and record or live stream things, but the state limited this to acting groups. So that's the one thing we're trying to understand more. I think as we get more clarity and we throw more scenarios at them, it will be clear that yes, you can rehearse a string orchestra. But just to share with you, like quite technically, we don't actually have that answer from the state because they've talked about it in terms of acting groups. So yes, but yes, if we clarify that acting groups and other kinds of groups can rehearse and record performances indoors, then the capacity that would apply to you is from the performance venues capacity guidelines. And for a space where you don't have a capacity number, it is 8 persons per 1,000 square feet and no more than 25.
Which I think just answered Erica's question, and which is limited to 25. Great, just wanted to be sure. Awesome. Great. Next slide, please, Christina. Temple, you came in quick. Is there any news about academic regulations, i.e. the capacity for lectures, et cetera, for when schools use our theater venues? Is it all the same?
Yeah, Temple, I don't have more on that yet.
Great.
Hopefully for next week.
Was it possible or even feasible, desirable to engage with several of the venues as these guidelines were put together to speculate on the impact of these guidelines on venues?
Yes, so just to recap how we've been engaging, we've obviously spent the time on these calls as well as in meetings with venues and organizations that use venues really consistently to hear about what these implications are. But these guidelines are coming from the state. Some venues did have access to the reopening committee. And Emily, I don't know if you can add a little bit of detail to that in terms of, you know, who was able to talk about how some of this might play out for venues at the state level.
Yeah, so my understanding is, and those of you who are on this call and were a member of that call, you know, you can raise your hand in the chat box. So that there was, there were two groups that were able to formally present to the reopening board that was made up of a number of museums. So that included the Museum of Science, the New England Aquarium, the Boston Children's Museum, the Zoo New England, and then the Museum of Fine Arts. And then there was a set of venues, including the Opera House, and with it the Boston Ballet, the Bach Center, and a few others who presented to the full reopening board. MassCreative had an opportunity to talk with staff on Secretary Keneally's office and brought with us Theater Offensive, the Arts Emerson, Mass Mocha, Angor Dance Troupe in Lowell, and the Hanover Theater. And I fear I'm forgetting one other, but to share that there is a breadth and diversity and complexity to our sector, that there is specific things that we need and guidance that we need. Right before phase 3 started, we also had the opportunity to talk with staffers for Baker and Polito, and then again with Secretary Keneally's staff around some of the things that we were looking to see. That included Deborah Cash from the Boston Dance Alliance, Dawn Simmons from Stage Source. Oh my gosh. See, this was in the period of time where things got really busy. I know there were more of us on that call. But again, sort of we got the opportunity to ask a couple of specific questions and share sort of a perspective, but that's about it. Is that helpful, Cara?
Yeah, I think it's just helpful to go back and just be transparent about, you know, where did we have these touch points. Yeah. But of course, like when you were having those conversations and up until, you know, the 5 days before we entered phase 3, we didn't actually know what we were responding to.
No, and Cara, that's a really excellent point. So I got the guidance, I got a phone call that an hour before Baker made his announcement that it was going to happen. And then I think 6 seconds after the words exited his mouth, I got in my inbox a copy of the guidelines, or sorry, a link to the website. So maybe others got more of an update or advanced copy, but really they are holding it very close. They are not, when they say like reopening date happens, that's like that really is like you will get your instructions for how to reopen on that day.
Thanks, Emily.
Great. Veronica asked, do we need a permit if we want to play music on a pickup truck or a trailer?
Lou or Paul, I think, does it depend on how amplified it is?
Anything amplified needs an entertainment license, but in that instance, I'm not even sure that the city would issue one. Are you talking like a moving pickup or stationary? I don't know. I guess that might be different. But yeah, as far as I know, it would definitely need it. But
Veronica says moving.
Yeah, you need an entertainment license regardless. But like I said, they're not issuing any licenses right now.
Oh, no amplification.
No, then that's just basically playing music out of the truck. So no, I don't think there's a permit for that if it's not amplified.
Veronica, if this leads to you performing on a moving vehicle, I'm really excited. Thank you, Lou.
Awesome. Is a guided live narrative experience with a museum that the same as a theater performance in a museum? Example is a 2-person theater production in a museum is a no. Is a guided tour of a gallery also a no, or does that differently qualify as a not performance? Sorry to get so granular.
Yeah, so guided tours are allowed, so they're not being treated the same as a theater performance. From the museum's cultural and historical facilities and guided tours guidelines, tour operators must limit group size and walking tours to groups of no more than 10 persons, including the guides. They recommend limiting tour parties to members of the same household, and yeah, to include tour participants and tour guides in your capacity numbers.
This was more of a comment and question. I would like to speak to one of the panelists offline regarding live event support, specifically the standards of use of items like laptops, microphones, musical instruments. Is there a way for us to connect?
Yeah, so if there is anybody on a previous call or this call who you want to connect with, you can feel free to email me or Pascal. And Pascal, maybe you can add your email to the chat in case folks don't have it, and we will absolutely put you in touch.
Just added. All right. Is there guidance in place for guests wearing masks once entered into the event, inside or outside?
Yes, so from the indoor and outdoor events guidelines from the state, there is a requirement for face coverings for all workers and attendees, except where an individual is unable to wear a face covering due to a medical condition or disability. And I will say that that's a little bit in conflict with the guidelines for performers, which says that masks are, I think, encouraged for performers, like where possible. So that might be one that we can clarify more, but just to this question specifically, attendees are required to wear face coverings.
This just came in from the chat. For clarity, early on this call was mentioned that 25% of capacity of a room could be allowed in, but the guidelines say 40% of capacity. Which is it?
It could be that we said 25% by accident, thinking about the 25, the cap of 25 people. Because it's 40% capacity. So that is correct, 40% capacity. Yeah, sorry about that.
I think that was the number related to the specific question. That's probably why. Thanks for the clarification. Are there plans for additional phases, 5, 6, 7, etc.?
There are not plans for additional phases. The state has planned for 4 phases, with the 4th phase being defined as development of vaccines and/or treatments that enable the resumption of new normal. So I think we've all been assuming that phase 4 is a final phase.
I think we kind of spoke to this already, but is a lecture speaker considered indoor or live performance?
Yeah, so this goes back to the kind of strangeness of the language around acting groups may rehearse and record performances indoors. So we're clarifying this again. I think, if acting groups may rehearse and record performances indoors, then lecturers or speakers would also be able to, as would, other kinds of performers. So we're gonna just get that actually in writing, and we'll let you know when we do. And I think that answers that question.
This just came in from the chat. If we are video recording a movement class segment for an access TV station, doing so indoors at our 1,500 square foot open arts facility, and only 1 to 2 people are being recorded with 1 camera person or staff, does the instructor need to wear a mask? The camera operator will be at least 15 to 20 feet away, and the place has MRV 13 filters.
There's enough detail in this one that I want to go through it all and make sure I'm referencing the right requirements. So let's copy this one and we'll come back to you. I think the answer is that the instructor doesn't need to wear a mask, but since I want to make sure I'm referencing the right thing here, because there's a few different parts. And I appreciate everybody's got really unique situations and trying to figure out, okay, it's this kind of space, but I'm doing this kind of activity, and again, pinging through the different guidelines. So it's helpful for us to hear like how specific those are, but I do want to make sure I'm getting you exactly the right answer. So let me follow up with you on that one.
Cool, we have 2 more. Do we need to secure a permit for a guide to utilize an amplification unit? This is from the Freedom Trail, so I think this is a different kind of amplification, so a guided tour as well.
Yeah, so my understanding from Licensing and Consumer Affairs is no, that the city doesn't issue permits for those kind of personal amplification devices now, and so that they wouldn't do that going forward. And I don't know, Lou and Paul, if that rings true for you, but that was the response I got from Kathleen Joyce.
Yeah, that sounds right. I don't think they've ever issued permits for that type of stuff, and we wouldn't ask for one if it were in a park.
Yeah, and that's specifically, that question is from the perspective of a tour guide who has like a little like a mic and something like clipped to them or whatever that they walk around with.
Yeah.
Cool. Last one, is an indoor guided tour program in a historic site permissible, or would that be considered a performance? We assume yes, but wanted to be sure.
Yeah, so an indoor guided tour is the same. This is kind of the same question as before about can we have guided tours within a museum, and the answer is yes. So the thing that the regulation that applies to this is, again, tour operators must limit group size and walking tours to groups of no more than 10 people, including the guides. And then that for this case in particular, and also for the museums, that tour has to be included, and that tour group has to be included in what you're thinking of as the occupancy for your space. So that's kind of where those two things intersect.
Great, awesome. Any other questions anybody has? You are welcome to add them to the chat. We do have about 8 minutes left. And I think Eva's on the call. She wanted to do a quick mention.
Yeah, we've got a couple of announcements, so we can go Eva and then Ruth.
Great, thank you. And thanks everybody. Thanks Cara, thanks Emily, thanks everybody speaking and organizing these important updates. I'm Eva Rosenberg from the Boston Foundation, and I'm sharing a resource that my wonderful colleagues in our nonprofit effectiveness team recently put out called the Racial Equity Capacity Builders Directory. And it is aimed to be not a set of recommendations, but a comprehensive list of firms, individuals, and others providing capacity building skills around racial equity specifically to nonprofit organizations locally. It is useful, I think, for a lot of reasons. One, it's pretty broad, but it also has a lot of information about each organization or trainer listed. So you can sort of sort through what you might be looking for. There's information on rates. I'm going to put the link to the directory in the chat. And I also know that some folks who do this work in a consulting capacity may want to be listed. And I know there's a planned update this fall. So a new resource for the field. I'll also put my email in the chat in case you have questions. And Christine, to your question, you can see in the directory which of the trainers and organizations works primarily with nonprofits, with for-profits, with a mix, with public entities, et cetera. So there's a sort of number of categories listed for each trainer. I'll put that in the chat now.
Thanks so much, Eva. Ruth, are you here?
Yep, I'm here. Thanks, Pascal. Hi, everyone. Ruth Mercado Zizzo from Edvestors. Just an announcement for those who might not have received it. On Thursday, July 23rd, in collaboration with the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture and Mass Cultural Council, we will be co-hosting our 3rd virtual forum on pre-K through 12 remote learning and arts education in CYD, with a focus on trauma-informed practice and how that can be implemented remotely. I will put a link to the Eventbrite invitation in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ruth. We got one question before we go from Temple. A new topic. Is there any discussion about arts groups who want access to tests for their artists and staff for when we gear back up? This would mean access to a certain number of tests on a regular basis.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Temple. We have not had this conversation yet around that kind of availability of testing. It's something that we should bring up, and I think it's the kind of conversation where we would want to have Chief Marty Martinez or someone at that level at BPHC to come weigh in on what that's looking like, because that is also projecting into the future a bit, but we can make that happen. Great. I also wanted to just circle back to Dan's question, and thanks Ruth and Eva for sharing those updates as well. So for an indoor event, which is how I'm interpreting Dan's live stream, the wording is encourage performers to wear face coverings during performances if possible. And I would only say that for the specific circumstance that Dan's describing, it would probably be worth cross-referencing that with the guidelines for adult instruction and just seeing if there's a discrepancy there, just because of the kind of activity that it is. And I think this goes for everybody, because there's so many ways to look at the different activities. If you can do something, like technically you can get away with wearing a mask and doing something, and like having a mic and being able to just like do that through a mask, or just err on the side of doing that. The language in the guidelines is encourage, and we're not going to be there like monitoring necessarily. So I would just say like try to have as much mask wearing as possible, and I think that's what our public health colleagues would urge us to say as well. But technically, if you see that as a performance and as performers, they're just encouraged to wear face coverings. So hopefully that answers that question.
Great.
Any others? Are we questioned out?
Got 3 minutes. Might as well.
Also open to any other updates or any other thoughts from folks as things are reopening. Welcome anyone kind of chiming in.
Erica asked, but performances are still not allowed, right? I believe yes, audiences are not allowed, especially large gatherings indoors.
Right, but the rules around performers are the same, even if there's no audience. So if you're live streaming something or you're rehearsing, we're asking those people to follow the same rules as the performers and the guidelines for events, if that makes sense. Any new sources of PPE for artists? Deborah, that's a good question. I'm not sure if anyone's tried the links on boston.gov for acquiring PPE. I can circle back and see if there's anything new there. I know that the supply chain has been sort of constantly evolving over the last few months, so we can check in on that. From Maggie, if the audience fit in the 8 people per 1,000 square feet, is that allowed? No, I believe the answer to that is no, because we are not allowed to have events with audiences. We're really like testing the boundaries of language here. This is, and I think again, like this is why we wanted to have Lou and Paul on is, if it's something that's that small or where people are already that spread out, is it something that can go outside? Is there a projected date for allowing audiences? No, we don't know when we're going to be in that phase. Sorry, Lou, were you going to say something?
Nope.
Okay. Marianne asks, since we're moving into phase 3 with MOAC, will MOAC continue to do weekly updates for the time being? Or maybe always? This is so helpful. Yeah, we're going to continue. I do anticipate that we'll take a couple of Fridays off in August because everybody needs a break. But we're going to continue generally with something like this. Oh yeah, thanks Lars for chiming in about Artisans Asylum helping with PPE. That's awesome. Great. All right. And that's 4 o'clock. If nobody's got any other announcements, thanks everybody for being here. Have a good weekend. And I hope everyone can take a moment and relax. And we'll see you next week. Bye, all.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.